Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In part two of this two-part chat with Paul, we cover his days working at McKinsey and how he managed to make the difficult transition into private equity as a consultant. We talk all about the private equity recruiting process, imposter syndrome, meditation, and how he was able to find balance. In this part two, Paul has some really great foundational advice for young, motivated go-getters. So make sure you all stay till the end. Enjoy. All right, Paul. So we left off when you had just received your offer at McKinsey, or you're just about to start at McKinsey. So why don't we start there? What was it like?
Yeah, McKinsey was a great experience. I think it was definitely, everything that people had promised in terms of the kind of learning curve that you get working in this kind of industry. Super smart people, really interesting, all kinds of backgrounds. You're kind of trained over the next several years to think in a very structured way that it's kind of almost like the financial modeling equivalent to banking is like structured thinking and problem solving within consulting. You're given way more responsibility than any 22-year-old should have. Economy, I feel like. But it's good. You learn a lot. And it's challenging too. I mean, you're as someone coming right out of school, like maybe you have some internship experience, but you really got to learn how to do this not for 10 weeks but for years. And how do you sustain that? How do you continue to grow and not be short-sighted? Because I think like a lot of people are constantly coming out of school thinking, okay, what's next, like with all of these stepping stones. I think especially for me and a lot of the students that I've talked to over the years, like once you finally get that full-time job, it's like the what's next mentality keeps firing, and you got to just be present and focused on the projects that you're working on and really trying to get value out of those. So
Yeah, I always say I don't know how kids stay focused nowadays when they get the investment banking offer or consulting offer, or at least the investment bankers, right after they get out of training. Private equity recruiting begins for a job that's almost 2 years away.
yeah,
And then even if you imagine if you get that offer, how are you supposed to focus and work and learn as much as I don't know how you can motivate. It's tough. But
yeah,
so you obviously, well, first off, you went all the way down to Atlanta, right?
yep.
So was that a choice of yours? Tell me about the practice. You were in the banking and payments practice, and specifically, was that something you chose? Was it something they just pushed you toward? You had mentioned because of your banking internship experience, that might have been a reason they pushed you there.
Yeah, so I got pushed towards that group, and that was in part based off of just networking and like kind of the it's like dropping one of those like coins down that thing that pegs around, and you never know where it's going to end up. And
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of the group that I landed on. And in a way, I think it was good to start off in a group that I think tapped into a lot of the skills that I had developed out of my banking internship. Because coming into this role, I think especially from a non-target school, one other challenge you can face is feeling like an imposter. Like, oh, I've had all these conversations, I've said the right things, and now I just can't get found out for the next few years. And I think coming from a place where I was able to say, no, what, I did like this 10-week internship where I was like the only analyst. I know I got great training. Like the analysts and associates at Morgan Stanley that I worked with were like genuinely like very focused on investing in me over that period. And so like I came into McKinsey very confident in my like modeling abilities,
Mm-hmm.
um, and felt like, okay, well, there are other people that are able to maybe problem solve more creatively than I can. But when it comes to modeling, like I feel super confident and I'm gonna really dig in there. And I think that led me to kind of get off on the right foot in a
Was
way
this
that,
tough though? Because I mean, it's a banking and payments practice, so you're dealing with like a lot of FIG, I
you
assume. So like, I assume the financial modeling is different there.
know, yeah, I mean, we didn't do as much financial modeling at
Yeah.
McKinsey. So like, I don't think in the entire time that I was there, I had to build like a DCF or anything
Right.
like that.
Right.
We did, in some ways, it's a nice combination because you get, the real intensive financial modeling training in banking. And then once you're dangerous in Excel, you go to consulting and you'll get all of these random scenarios that, require creativity in the way that you build things. And so we were doing a lot of stuff across the value chain in either payments or banking and helping clients think about, what markets they should focus on based off of growing volumes and fees and interest rates and
It's a lot of strategy. So basically,
yeah,
but data-based strategy.
yeah, exactly. And like I spent a lot of time. Like one of my favorite projects, I flew over to Europe, and this was actually right before I transferred.
Hmm.
Um, I was on a project where we were helping build essentially a global forecast for the entire um, payment transaction space and all the different revenues and fees and profit pools that would come out of that.
Hmm.
And basically got like, a set of free weekends in Europe out of that trip and tapped into my strengths and really felt like that was about like a year and a half in.
Hmm.
Um, at that point, I just felt like I was, growing in the work that I was doing and
You're
never.
giving a lot of value for the client with that type of work.
Yeah, and, like, I was starting to get familiar with this type of industry, like, a lot of the learning curve starts to level off, and so, um, if at that point you had asked me what the next few years would look like, I would have just been like, "Yeah, I'm gonna keep growing in this role and probably remain focused on those clients and then probably, like, go to business school." Um, a lot of my path after entering McKinsey is things that, uh, would have surprised the me before those decisions, I think.
Fair. So what was that first kind of surprise? Was it the transition internally at McKinsey?
Yeah, and I think transitioning within firms, like depending on the type of work you're doing, um, at least in my case, it was very light. Like it wasn't like I went through this intensive interview process. I mean, I think they kind of count on whoever interviewed you and that whole system to have done a lot of the quality control. I
Yeah.
think a lot of it was fit. So the fact that I had come from, first of all, I found out like a lot of times McKinsey will reach out internally if there's a role that they're interested in filling, if they think that they can do it internally, because it just saves the recruiting process.
Of course. Yeah. Were you actively looking at that point, or it sounds like
No,
you weren't?
yeah, I was super happy with my
You had just
group.
done the trip to Europe. You were psyched. You.
It was like, hey, this email came through. This sounds interesting. Why don't I click it and see what happens? And then it kind of creeped into well, I can always say no if it doesn't work out. Or if I'm not interested at the end. And so had a bunch of conversations with more and more people in the group, and it sounded like, um, what it sounded like? It sounded like those days where you're in the office in investment banking and you're modeling these mergers, and all of a sudden there are these cogs synergies that you just assign a percentage to. It's like, well, the companies will figure that out. And like this kind of work was promising to like really break into that type of strategies. How do you create value in a merger setting? One thing I really didn't appreciate was just how much internal plumbing goes on at each of these companies to make organizations run. So um, I couldn't have predicted that it would have been as interesting as it was, but I was intrigued enough to like take the jump. And the next year and a half, I ended up spending working on a lot of different merger management type projects where it's
Like post integration, so after an acquisition, you go
yeah,
in. Were you going? So you were going for specific clients, looking at the acquired company, figuring out how to way to get the systems to talk, or transfer over, and all of that.
yeah, it's kind of a mixture of things because like
Was it the
you
actual implementation, or was it more the strategy around how they should implement?
both, and I think you can think of it in different phases. So like
Mhm.
we, for one example, one project I was on, we were there before close. Like the client had hired us before actually closing the acquisition, and then we were helping them think through, okay, how are we going to, across all these 16 different divisions that sort of overlap for both companies, but sort of don't perfectly align, how are we going to functionally make sure that each of their interdependencies and um, functions are able to track towards this operating single entity at close whenever we help them issue the press release and all that stuff. So
Mhm.
that was one example. I think there are some more value creation specific focus projects. So like there's another deal I was on where we came in, it was actually post merger,
Mhm.
but regulation had lifted that finally let these companies merge. They were kind of held separate even though they had already gone through the transaction. And once that regulation lifted, McKinsey got brought in, and we had to essentially figure
Was it
out.
like an antitrust thing that it was in review or something like that? Sort of,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
yeah.
You
So
can't say, that's fine. Yeah.
yeah, once that lifted, it was basically like, okay, now we have all these groups that we expected to merge. Here is our top-down assessment of what each of the synergies could be. But first, we need to figure out, okay, this group has this many costs associated with each of the different divisions. This other part of the organization has these costs associated with the divisions, and we're going to now form a future state organization. Who's going to claim what costs? I mean, there's a lot of contention going on in that kind of environment.
Hmm.
People want controllable costs; they don't want uncontrollable costs. There's just a lot that goes on from a politics standpoint from these merger projects.
I'm
Pretty
sure.
interesting stuff. But you get to see a lot of value created because once you work through that process, you help them understand, okay, who's owning what. Um,
Do you feel
you
like there are, with the right acquisition, there is a lot of value created? Because I know there's a lot of arguments that acquisitions for the sake of acquisition, a lot of them destroy value.
Yeah, I think you have to be really strategic, and McKinsey will tell you, that you really should, hire a consulting firm that can help you do this effectively. I do think it makes a big difference. Um, a lot of the ones that I worked on, the logic was pretty straightforward where the value was. I think um, general rule of thumb is it's easier to create cost synergies than revenue synergies, and that's where things can get a lot trickier.
Hmm.
A lot of the work that we did was on integration and cost synergies. Um,
Just
but
meaning
yeah, just
centralizing the SG&A.
yeah, and there's a lot of like fixed costs that you can cut when you merge organizations, and sadly, there's a lot of pressure on the headcount side that you can place, and it was just really interesting seeing like the interchange between this model that says, hey, you should be able to cut 30%, and then these division heads that were like, oh my gosh, like I want to cut 30% of these people, and so
Yeah.
you know a lot of contention, a lot of value that you can create for like the merger itself. There's a lot of personalities you're honestly dealing with.
I'm sure. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a lot of contention in politics and everything. I'm sure it's very interesting though. So you were up in Boston for that year and a half or almost 2 years,
Yeah.
and so that first transition internally was a surprise in McKinsey. Your next jump into private equity was also a surprise. For you were there for almost, been there for what, 4 years now?
Yeah, so I was there for 3 years. I think I was like a month under 3 years,
For
like right
McKinsey.
around.
Yeah. So like, when did you start thinking of maybe going buy side, or was it again just a surprise fluke thing that you ended up
It
taking
was a
the
surprise. So um, I can't remember if that time I already like bought my GMAT prep materials or what, because I knew like longer term I wanted to do an MBA. That was kind of the path that I thought was logical, that a mentor had sort of set for me. And so figured, well, I'm getting good experience here. Maybe I'll do an MBA, apply next fall or something.
Mhm.
Um, and I just remember it was probably one of the more intense projects I've been on. It was um, the winter of, I guess, 2016. Um, it was basically like that winter right before I was coming up on the summer of my 3 year mark, and
Got it. Mhm.
I had a project where I was traveling every Monday on a 6 a.m. flight to LAX. So
Oh, Boston to LA.
Boston to LA, you land at 9:30 local time, and then I would drive for an hour um, to get to the client. And so, I mean, it was a brutal experience. And then you try and get out on like a 4 p.m. flight, and if you can do that, you get back at 2 a.m. local time. Otherwise, you're confined to the red eye. So,
Is that
and
on
this was
That's on Thursday night?
yeah, yeah, that's on Thursday night. And this was also like just a really intense project. And so I didn't have the same like health issues I did at Morgan Stanley, but like
Mhm,
my body was run down. I was like definitely feeling it.
mhm.
Wrong time to have like wine as your hobby too. Like it's like I remember just blowing my nose like so much in these like sessions and stuff. And my I say this in part just because I think like for analysts who are coming into these roles, you know, your like personal burn rate is like such an important like variable to manage your first few years and just like figuring out what works for you. And at the time I started to like dabble in meditation and like other things that I think were just like healthy hygiene habits to be in addition to maybe being like goods in and of themselves, like just helpful things to like sustain you while you're trying to like crank on these projects that require a ton of travel. And I had this conversation with my girlfriend at the time, now wife, who basically was like, look, something is off. This was in like January or February. You're like run down all the time. Like, I hate seeing you sick. Um, maybe you can like deal with this on a daily basis, but like, I don't want to see you, feeling sick all the time. So like something needs to change. And so
Yeah, you're traveling across the country twice a week.
uh, And so I remember like coming out of that conversation, like, okay, well maybe I need to switch to some like local projects or, just really stand up for myself in terms of like setting a boundary or something.
Mhm.
I kid you not, like I woke up the next morning with a voicemail from a partner at the private equity fund that I went to, Insight, reaching out because I can't even remember how my resume or like contact information had been passed along to him. Um, but he basically,
One
I
of
get,
your 500 calls or whatever you had done
yeah,
earlier.
yeah, because I wasn't even like proactively looking into private equity at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Um, but just like friend of friend or something, he
Mhm.
reached out, liked my background, and Insight is a operationally intense. I mean, everyone says that, but Insight was founded by former Bain consultants that like came in with the investment thesis. Hey, like a lot of these middle market companies are, don't have the tools or the capabilities to really create the kind of value that we're able to do at Fortune 500 companies. Why don't we bring this to middle market businesses? And so they love to hire from a mixture of consulting and finance backgrounds. And yeah, I don't know. I hit it off with the partner and I told him, I was like, yeah, I really like what you guys are doing. This sounds super interesting, but I just, I to be honest with you, I just had a conversation with some people I care about, and I told them I'd be, making better health decisions, and so I just don't think that this is the right time to be recruiting for private equity. But I'd love to stay in touch, and maybe like 6 months from now or something, would love to like re-entertain this conversation. And he was like, "Yeah, it's not really the way that we do recruiting, but yeah, let's grab coffee next time you're in town." And I didn't think anything more of it at that point. Like I genuinely was like, okay,
He's
this is
like,
a
"Are
great.
you in or are you out?" Basically.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm
Like,
out,
"You
but
realize what I just offered you, right?" He's like, "Are you kidding me?"
yeah, and I'm like, I'm out, but you seem great. Let's get coffee. When I'm in Dallas. Um,
So why would you turn down a private equity job coming from consulting? I know a lot of consultants are trying to make that jump. I know you were at McKinsey, you were at a great place, you were working on interesting projects, but you seemed like, you were traveling, that you were on a really tough, with a really tough engagement. Did you see that as, I mean, wouldn't you see that private equity recruiting for, yeah, a few weeks of pain as a potential way out?
yeah, I sort of I think like So at that point, I'm almost 26.
Hmm.
Um, and I think if you like chart this path all the way back to like my sophomore year, I think, or I guess sophomore, junior year, like a lot of a lot of other things were sacrificed in that time in order to like make these career leaps. And like I wouldn't go back and change things. Like I feel good about the path that I've taken, but at the time it was kind of like, man, you know what? I have been making a lot of sacrifices, and like clearly if I'm like feeling this bad, then maybe it's time to focus a little bit less on my career and more on myself. And um
And you felt like McKinsey would provide that a good, just because you were already there, wasn't starting a new
it's sort of
job.
a known variable, I had built
Yeah.
credibility. The learning curve there. I knew there would be a new one in private equity. It was kind of like a synthesis of the two,
Hmm.
uh,
That's
and
fair.
so it's kind of like who knows what's behind this door, even though this guy sounds great.
Yeah,
Um,
and you had had some health issues in the past, so you didn't know what was it really like working there.
yeah, and
Although,
if I hadn't had that conversation with my wife the night before, then I I probably would have just said, yeah, like I'm interested. Like let's see where this goes. Kind of like the past experience, but
mhm, like the previous 6 years of your life.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, okay, so you have this conversation. He seems interested. You say, well, yeah, maybe in 6 months. So this was like right around February or so.
Yeah, this was like end of January.
And so you're never in. I assume he's in New York.
He was in Dallas,
He's in
so
Dallas. So
the
you're
firm that
never in
I worked
town in
for.
Dallas, are you?
So that's where I'm from
Okay.
originally.
Yeah.
I would go back occasionally, but they have a Dallas and New York office, and so I worked in the New York office for 3 years. So like sort of spoiler to where the story goes, but
Hmm.
um, so we left it at that. I was like gonna maybe get coffee with him when I'm home visiting family or something,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden middle of February rolls around and they're doing their recruiting, and I've like rolled off my travel project in California. I'm like local, I'm like exercising again, like I've got a good rhythm with work. And I remember getting this email, and it's from the VP who was leading recruiting at the time. And he's like, "Hey, Paul, this partner passed along your resume and said that you're interested in our recruiting process. Um, would love to like hop on the phone and chat with you about the firm if you want to like get involved in this recruiting process."
Hmm.
And at that point, I'm kind of like, "Huh, did he just forget, or did he just ignore
Probably
my?"
ignored. He just ignored.
Yeah.
He's
And
like, this kid can't be serious. He's gonna take the job if we just talk to him.
yeah, so very glad that whatever happened there, my resume was passed along. And so the more people, like at that point, I was feeling better. I was like, I had kind of shifted back into the mentality of, okay, like let's see where this goes, and
Okay.
I can always say no.
Did
And
you at that point, like when you got that call, and were you thinking probably makes sense to go reach out to some recruiters as well to try and get into some other processes?
um, I honestly, I didn't want to just take any private equity role.
Hmm.
So I think I kind of like set a threshold for fit at that point that was like super high.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm living intentionally with my like work life integration, like never balance, but integration.
Hmm.
And I felt like, okay, you know what? This firm feels like it's a good fit for my background. I'm going to see if I like the people. I'm going to talk to them. Um,
Are there
I,
other firms that are kind of look more for the operationally minded folk or the strategy consultants? Are there,
yeah, there definitely are. I think,
just for the listeners, do you have any off the top of your head besides Insight?
yeah. So,
Bain, right?
I mean, not to like promote competitors, but yeah, I think that there are a handful of firms like kind of scattered, like Church is one that I know does hire from kind of a mixture of backgrounds and
Hmm.
is focused. I think you've seen a lot of smaller firms come up at like lower middle market firms over the past decade. and you Google search operational intensive private equity, and you can find a lot of them with the same tagline. But I would just recommend people like really look into the backgrounds and bios of the people leading those firms, because you leave like a Wall Street type group or a consulting firm with like institutional culture, and it really does get heavily shaped by whoever's at the top in these smaller firms.
Mhm.
So um, yeah, basically I made that jump um, mentally to be like, okay, I'm going to start recruiting, and I was kind of more focused on you know angling properly and firing at the right time than like finding more bullets to shoot at other opportunities. So I remember like basically employing the same strategy I took when I pivoted from banking to consulting. Like busted out the resume, figured out like okay, how do these look for private equity.
Mhm.
You go to templates, you look at what people are using, you find people who have been in the industry, you try and get their input.
Yeah,
uh,
our private equity resume template is really more banking heavy because that's
yeah,
really who's doing it. So it's, how to shape the transaction experience, all that stuff. But even for I've seen consultants using it, and instead of saying client engagement, they'll even call it transaction experience to make it
yeah,
look more like operate financially, uh,
yeah. It's
which is
it's
smart. It's smart.
yeah, you definitely know your audience, and you tailor it accordingly. But yeah, I mean, mine was just that. Like I took a banking style resume and I changed select transaction experience to select project experience, and just tried to show a set of experiences from McKinsey that fit well with
Hmm.
um, this company. Like made sure I knew how to talk about the most recent deals, and or like mergers that I'd worked on. And yeah, from there, like it just felt really natural. I mean, you have to nail your 2-minute story, right? Like there's always that. There's the behavioral questions. You have to be prepared for those, and then just brush up on LBO and technicals. But I think like the risk for consultants is to be too self-conscious a lot of times about the financials and over prepare in this area that's like not their strength. Like I'm not telling you shouldn't know your financial
LB,
modeling.
LBO modeling and all that good stuff.
Yeah, but like I think that becomes the focal point for a lot of people preparing out of insecurity, when in reality you bring like a very different skill set to the table. And to the extent you can effectively talk about that in your story, in your behavioral stories that you've come up with, like, that's where you should really be, I think, digging in and anchoring.
Well, I think that really helps if it's an operationally intensive
Exactly. Yeah.
PE fund. You can continually keep framing it as
Right.
that value, because they respect it and they value it, obviously based on who they've hired.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you want to keep framing it around your strengths, right? Every single one of your answers, if you can bring it back to experience you had and whatnot, I think it's gives you a much better shot. So was this the only was Insight the only PE firm you interviewed
One and
at?
done. Yeah.
One and done. So tell me, um, the VP asked if you were interested. You said yes. What was the process like? So how many days later, how many weeks later were you invited in? Or
Yeah.
how long did it take you to get on a call? And then when were you invited in for a?
Yeah, I should have done my homework before this call to just looking at a timeline. But
Well, roughly.
yeah, I think we talked sometime in the next couple of days.
Mhm.
Um, so we had a good
Did you
conversation.
feel like he was selling you on the firm a little bit? Like they really wanted you, right? From your CV?
I didn't get that sense, and like having seen the funnel now, like I know that he definitely wasn't selling me. Um, I think we talked over the weekend too. So like, I think he was just trying to get as many of these in as possible. um, but like what he said struck a chord with me just based off the firm's background. And um, I liked that it was a Texas-based firm, because I could either be in Texas and make that leap, or be in New York, which is a city where a lot of my friends were, and I could visit home, whenever. Um, but so yeah, I really clicked with just I think the investment strategy and thesis of the firm, like, and liked the first two people I talked to, the partner and this VP. And I think recruiting kicked off in the next like week or two. Yeah.
And do you remember how many rounds or how that worked?
Yeah. Yeah. It was 2 rounds. Nothing's normal about this process. So
And how many associates were they bringing in? Did you know that beforehand?
I did not. I had no clue.
Did it end up being two, three?
So they ended up hiring two. Um, and usually what happens is like each first round, usually an associate will interview six candidates, 6 to 8. I don't know how many you squeeze in, but then you kind of like force rank those and narrow it down to your super day group. And I think there were like 8 to 10 of us on super day, something like that. And so this again goes to show you
The
just how,
odds are still really bad.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. But I wasn't thinking about it from a probabilistic sense. I was just, going along with this, and
Mhm.
um, everything continued to make more and more sense the more I went. So to just again hammer home like how human this whole process is. So I happened to be in Dallas for it was actually I can't remember if it was a funeral or like a ceremony or something. I was in town for the week
Mhm.
that they were doing the phone interviews. And I remember the associate reached out to me and was asking when I was free for a phone interview. And I told him, hey, I'm free, basically whenever, whenever you want to talk. But
Mhm.
also, I happen to be in Dallas right now, so no pressure at all. If you just want to do this over the phone, but I'm happy to like meet you if you want to do that. And this was on a Thursday, and the associate was like, okay, great. There's this bar, and it is on this street. Like, let's meet up here for a drink or for an interview on Friday afternoon. So um,
Was it a drink or an interview?
we had pretzel cheese dip and we drank beers, and I felt very relaxed the whole time. Obviously, I mean it was kind of awkward because like I was in this suit at
Right.
this bar, and especially on Fridays, like it's very much a consultant environment or culture. Like people are dressed down a little bit.
Mhm.
Uh, But yeah, it was a great conversation. It felt more just fit and conversational in nature. I'm sure maybe he like dug into my background to a certain extent. I think he like pulled up my resume on his phone or something, but like that was the extent of it. And we just had a really good conversation. And I came out of that thinking, wow, if the other associates are like this guy, then and if the rest of the process is like this, then this will be a great experience.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just felt like the stories I was able to talk about from my background really jived well with the kind of work that Insight does with its portfolio companies. Um, and so, yeah, I pulled up. I was like, well, I think like that's the best I could have done. So might as well feel good about it. Um, sure enough, like a couple days later, I get invited back for the super day in like a week or something. And that's when I like was like, okay, now I really need to pull up all my like old financial modeling guides and stuff. And like,
LBO modeling tests. Did you do any of those to get ready?
I did, yeah. I did like handful of videos, and then I did just a couple of like paper.
Maybe
Uh,
LBO.
yeah,
Good stuff. And so, did they test you on that?
they
Wait,
did. Yeah, there was a modeling test. So I felt that that went fine. I'm sure there were some bankers who blew me out of the water in that respect, but I had a little bit of banking experience in my background,
yeah, you
so.
did. You did. So there was between 8 and 10 of you. A couple of you got offers. Um, as you're going through, how many partners, how many VPs did you meet? A couple other associates.
We met the entire firm,
Mhm.
people
Like
from
20 investment professionals or so.
yeah, 20-ish.
Mhm.
Everyone from New York, except for one guy who I think his wife was pregnant, flew in.
Mhm.
Like it was a whole ordeal. 2-on-ones. I want to guess probably did like yeah 8 to 10 2-on-one interviews, and yeah, I don't know. It just resonated with the group, and my background was a good fit, which I think, like, is something you can't really substitute for. Like, you can
Yeah.
sell. Like, that's why it's super important to start this stuff early on in your college career. Is like, you can try and sell yourself as much as possible, but if you haven't gotten the right experiences that make you a good fit for whatever you're going after, then it's just all an uphill battle, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, because the odds are already stacked against you. You not only have to be good with your EQ, with your social cues and intelligence and speaking in the interview, and be comfortable based on all the reps you did that helped you, but
Right.
you also just need to have the right background, period, to even be in the
Yeah.
room.
Yeah.
So, so tell me, did you know like it was going well as you're going through this? Was there any like curveballs, like technical, like what's the IRR? Your money doubles in 3 years. What's the IRR or something like that?
Yeah, I,
Or was it more like operationally structured? What would you do in this situation? Any sort of cases? That type of
there
stuff?
was a there was a case. It was pretty straightforward. It was more of like reviewing an investment opportunity, giving your thoughts. Like
A little more
we,
consulting heavy-ish, kind of similar.
um, I think it was probably down the fairway, so that either side could lend their or demonstrate their skills. They gave that to us like a couple days or maybe like the day before,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I just remember like going through that process of like studying that, building out like a few quick pages of my own thoughts, which I brought in, and apparently like a lot of people didn't do that. But I've seen a handful of candidates do that over the years now, recruiting for Insight. Like, why not go above and beyond with that kind of stuff for an interview? I just remember like feeling excited,
Just a few
rather,
slides, just like a few slides.
yeah, just a few slides with like my thoughts on like the positives of the
And
deal.
you didn't feel like it was too try hard or anything like that in doing that? Were you like handing them out to the two-on-ones? You wrote a bunch of copies and stuff?
I I made like a self-deprecating joke about like, oh, I'm a consultant, like, love making pages. So here you go. I think like, I don't know. I think it struck the right balance where they appreciated like the work that had been put in. But yeah, it was, a handful of behavioral questions,
Yep.
um, case model, and then, you've got interesting partners at all these different private equity funds. This has changed, so I'm not like spoiling anything for this partner, but I got asked the question, who, barring religious figures, is the most influential person in human history and why? And you have to like, give your spiel and make your case for, who you think that is, and like get dug into by the partner. So
Gosh, so brutal.
yeah, so they like to make you think with some of these things.
Yeah. So, the offer come later that day as you walk out, you shake everyone's hand, thank you. There's was the other offer given to a consultant as well, or was it to a banker?
The other one went to a banker,
Mhm.
and yeah, I got I think it was an email later that evening, just like, hey, are you free to chat tomorrow? And I walked out like not feeling like it was in the bag, but I like had a good feeling. It was kind of like the first round where it's like, well, I think I've done as well as I could
Could
do
have
here, and I feel good about the result. And so then the next morning we jumped on the phone, and they told me that I was getting the offer, assuming my references checked out, and obviously that went fine. And yeah, so I
was it
basically got.
and so it was for the New York office, or how did that get determined? Like,
Um, I think that they asked me my preference at some point during the process, and I just said that I wanted New York, and my wife's family's in Jersey, so
perfect.
I knew that if I went back to Dallas, then I'd be in Dallas forever, and I don't know that we're just
You're
yet
still
ready to make.
young. You're still young.
Yeah.
Um, great. So I guess going through this whole process, you made the jump, you didn't stress out, you were in a good place physically, you only recruited at one place, you didn't stretch yourself too thin. Do you advise other people to be that almost presumptuous? I'll call it a little bit presumptuous because you're so confident, or was it just more like you knew your time would come later if it didn't come then?
Yeah, I definitely was not confident that it was gonna work out.
Mhm.
like as I went into this process. So it wasn't like, okay, I'm just going to interview with this one private equity fund and
'Cause you're so confident it's gonna happen, yeah.
yeah. No, I think like, there's one of the terms that you like cover in MBA and like negotiations is BATNA, the best alternative to negotiated agreement. And I think part of what really was working in my favor for this experience is that I had, sort of gotten my footing. I knew that I was in a good place at McKinsey and I could be patient, like I
Mhm.
could wait for the right opportunity to come around. When I would go for an experience, it wouldn't be because I felt like the bridge was burning behind me. It's because I'm excited about this opportunity and I'm going to try and put my best foot forward. And so I think like, the mindset going in doesn't need to be, oh, this job's going to work out, but I think you should at least have a signal going off in your head, what the intention is behind.
Not a panic signal?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely helps with your mindset going in. If you can be just super calm, just really be excited, like you said, going in to just almost look at the interview process like oh, this case so interesting. You really just go into it with intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
Almost like it opens up your brain to not be so panicked. Like, am I delivering the right answer? And that comes across as confidence. So I think it can help. Question: McKinsey, your BATNA was great. You're at an incredible consulting firm. Did you feel like um, there was room there to get promoted, continue to stay on? And is that very common? I know, or you felt like business school would have been in the cards, say a year to the following year.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely felt like there was room for growth. However, I think the calculus is very different for someone coming from a Yale that is, in my role at McKinsey versus someone coming from a less well-known school. And again, like Wheaton was great experience, like great academics, like professors, amazing in terms of how much they invest into you. However, when people make snap second judgments about who you are based off of, the brands that you have on your LinkedIn and your resume and whatnot, like
Mhm.
there's a lot more value to going and getting a really great MBA experience. And I think that was very palpable for me, especially, I mentioned earlier, just kind of the risk of feeling like this, imposter syndrome coming from a non-target school.
Wanted
Um,
to get a target on your resume, basically.
yeah, exactly. And, I'll say this, I think the more you select brands, that's not necessarily the solution to the dealing with imposter syndrome if that's something you have. Like I think really digging into the work and like continuing to feel more confident in like what you're producing is ultimately going to be the way that you do that.
Mhm.
But for me it's sort of like, yeah, I want to go get an MBA. And so I knew I'd be leaving the firm, whether it be at 3 years, 4 years.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So
Yeah.
you get the offer. Do you mind talking about, I guess, let's go to like pay from when you started at McKinsey. Do you mind giving a range in terms of like bonuses or stuff like that? It doesn't have to be exact. And then I assume it was a pretty big pay jump going to PE, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. I think I think regardless of where you go from, um, your first consulting role, you should probably get a pretty big pay bump, because you're not getting the brand compensation anymore. You're not getting the growth opportunities or optionality as much anymore. But yeah, I think just loosely, I will say, somewhere in the range of, like 70 to, um, yeah, call it 50 to 100%, just to be super vague here.
Yeah,
Um,
for the bonus on the McKinsey's.
oh no, I'm saying just in terms of like the jump in total
Oh, the
comp.
jump in total comp. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Which is a big jump.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And that definitely like felt palpable and like it almost felt more representative of the type of opportunity that I was getting, more than the pay bump. Like I'm a at the time I was a guy who's like, single, I guess dating my wife at the time, but like no major expenses in my life, so all kind of gravy after a certain point. That just wasn't really a huge motivator, but it did feel like, oh wow, like this
Did you
signals
did you
something.
treat yourself at all to anything when you got the offer? A nice dinner with your future wife, or
I did go on a trip to Napa Valley with a buddy. Um, my wife was busy working, so she missed out on that. But I went with some friends to California to celebrate.
very fun, very fun. And so, once you started, what was the transition like? Going from McKinsey to a PE firm, was it relatively smooth because of your previous work, or was there a little bit more of a learning curve than you expected in terms of like handling all the due diligence and managing those teams?
Yeah, so Insight's pretty special in that the role is really split 50-50 between working on deals and working on portfolio company stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and that might vary in a given month, but it'll average out over the course of a year or over a 2 to 3 year experience. And I felt like I was very well equipped to find ways to help out at the portfolio companies, to like work well with the management teams. Um, a lot of the value that I think I was able to add over my 2 to 3 years there was stuff that didn't necessarily get asked of me, but things that I figured out could be valuable.
To the portcos, you mean
Yeah,
specifically?
yeah, exactly. And and I think like that kind of work is a really um, helpful way to, I think, differentiate yourself at a like younger stage in your career because like deals essentially are they're not commodities, but they all have the same different milestones, benchmarks, and they're metricized, so there's a little bit of difference there. But I think if you're able to find really meaningful ways to impact a portfolio company and shift their EBITDA, like that's I think that's pretty special. I did have I definitely had to like, brush first of all, brush up on the modeling stuff I had done
Hmm.
in banking. Um, and then I would say, the first year to year and a half was like kind of learning stuff from a lot of my peers, like really great other associates that kind of helped me fill in the gaps where I didn't know stuff.
Hmm.
And I think mentally there's a shift kind of around that year and a half mark where instead of asking like, oh, like I wonder what the right way to do this is, and being concerned that you're not going to do it the right way, you kind of have those fundamentals down, and there's a shift to like, okay, how do I build this out in Excel, and how do I think of this creative way to toggle this or display this, and you kind of get over the hump of worrying about doing things wrong and are more like thinking about, okay, how do I do this creatively in a way that's going to you know be a useful.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, did you feel like um, you knew you were still going to go to business school? You knew
Yeah.
at some point, and so tell me a little bit about that thought process because it's not a. I mean, I'm not sure if Insight allows you to stay on. Is it considered a two and out program and then potentially come back?
2 or 3,
Hmm.
and out with some people getting offers to come back after business school. Expectation is that VP and aboves have MBAs. That's obviously not the case at all PE funds, but just I think given the thesis at Insight, that's important to them.
Hmm.
And so I came in, and it's you can get a third year promotion if you do well your first couple years. So I came in kind of like, wow, this is a huge opportunity. Um, I don't like I say all this stuff and kind of cushion it in retrospect, but a huge part of me was like, man, am I going to be able to do the modeling that's required to like, be successful in this role?
Of course,
And
Gary.
yeah, I was super intimidated. And I think like, you get the hang of this other role. Like I was just feeling like, super comfortable in my skin at McKinsey. Um, which takes a lot longer in consulting because you're always getting thrown into new projects, I feel like. But so I was kind of like, well, I'm going to hold on for 2 years. Like this is going to be a ride. I'm going to learn a ton, and like hopefully I don't screw things up, and I'm going to figure out a way to like make it through this. That was sort of my mentality going in. So very much from like a and intimidated, but like super interested by the kind of work that they were doing.
Did you
Um,
know kind of going into this that it was extremely competitive to get a private equity role?
yeah. Oh, yeah, for
So
sure.
you kind of had the perspective of like appreciating what was in front of you and how how desired it was.
Yeah, and so it was
Okay.
kind of like, man, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to like do a good job for these 2 years.
What about
And
work life though? You know, you said you were worried about health, or at least some people close to you were worried about health. Tell me about that.
yeah, so I think I just sort of set out to do things that kind of kept my sanity. So like my first year of PE, I did a lot of running,
Cool.
and like basically every day would Insight was great in that it's not a heavy FaceTime culture because you're traveling so much. Like
Mm.
if you're not in the office, it's assumed that you're at a portfolio company or, at
Yeah,
a
yeah,
management presentation. So, you're given a lot of autonomy, and I think it allows you to, if you're proactive about it, integrate, things that you need to be doing, like healthy habits. For me, like I'd get a 3 mile run in pretty much every day. Um, and I felt like that really helped, but still, it was really like that first year and a half that I was just kind of like, I'm like learning what happens in this situation, like I'll figure it out, and hopefully I don't screw things
yeah.
up.
You did better than me. I got fired within 6 months of my first PE gig.
Wow,
Yeah,
look at you now. So
yeah.
there you go. It must have been for the best.
It
Um,
worked out. It worked out. But yeah, you never know. Sometimes you don't know what you're walking into. Sometimes you're naive. As a 20, I was 24 at the time. I was a baby.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. So I was like, I think that imposter syndrome kind of carried with me, and it was like, oh man,
this
I,
non-target BS, man, is the thing. Is like you'd already proven yourself at a top consulting
yeah.
firm. You still had it.
And I think I like had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder that after having done the investment banking experience, like in a way, I felt like I had gotten an incredible internship because I was like the one analyst, right? So like
Mhm.
anything that has to get done during that 10 weeks that they want to dump, like came to me. So I felt like I grew a ton, but at the same time, I would always in the back of my mind, I was like, well, am I going to get really sick? And this all fall apart, right?
Mhm.
So sort of like, okay, let's hang on, let's do these 2 years and just get into a good school. Like
Was the
that.
was the fear of health more around you were kind of getting you got sick with the internship. You were getting pretty sick at McKinsey with the tough projects with the flights and
Yeah.
later the weather for a while there. Was it more like fear of the pneumonia coming back? Is that something that can happen, or what was the thought process there? Or was it just like,
So I had like a recurring sinus infections every like few months. Probably like the first half of my 20s. Like,
wow,
it turns out that drinking less is correlated with getting less sinus infections. So it was working out, like
you were
I think.
drinking pretty heavily throughout your like early finance day or consulting?
Honestly, no, like, it wasn't even that, it was just
Okay,
that, like, I don't know, like,
couple glasses of wine, not a big deal, but it wasn't good for you.
yeah, yeah, I think it just, like, sticks to me in a way it doesn't to most people. Like, I inherited that from my mom, and I didn't, like, accept it, I
Mhm.
think, until a little bit later. Like, beer is, like, much less of a, challenge for me, but, like,
Interesting.
that
I'm the
just goes
opposite. I'm the opposite.
yeah,
I love
drinking
beer, but it does not sit well with me at all. I can drink
the
wine.
yeah, so, like, a huge part of your 20s is just, like, figuring out how your body works and managing
You
that.
ever drink any scotch?
I do. That is great, and it hits pretty hard the next day for me.
Yeah, well, you don't need too much. I mean,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I've cut way back, and so I had a drink a couple nights ago with my wife, and I remember it was just like, wow. I was like, I am definitely 40 now. I turned 40 about a month ago, so I feel like I could feel it, and I threw out my back. I'm just an old man. Um,
Yeah.
so okay, so you're kind of getting through this. You're like business school. I just got to get through a couple of years. So tell me about the whole business school application process while you're trying to. Did you take the GMAT? What was that like? Trying to
Yeah,
balance all this, and then we'll wrap it up.
I took the GMAT, I took the GMAT as I was wrapping up McKinsey. I just kinda knew, like, "Hey, I don't wanna be focused on this while at Insight, and I feel like there's a law of the universe that whenever you're planning to get a weekend of GMAT prep in, a deal is going to come up that blows up your weekend. So, I've seen a number of associates that just completely get derailed from their uh, prep because it's so tough to juggle both of those. So I was fortunate enough to like not have that issue. It was more like, how do I write good essays? How do I, get good recommendations? And literally same process. Like talk to people who went to Wharton, for example. Like talk to people who, um, have thoughts on how to write your essays, how to, tailor your resume. Um, I didn't hire a consultant. I I called my wife my consultant, and she had a lot of good input. I do think that that's a good investment if you're in a place to pay for that, and you just think about like the incremental difference that could have
Mhm.
for.
It can make the difference between getting in and not. I didn't
Yeah,
use one either, but I did have some friends that were at HBS that were incredible writers and helped
yeah.
me
You just
polish it.
you tap into your network, and people are super helpful. So I remember going through that process, and yeah, fast forward to, I guess it's December, and I got into Wharton, was super excited, and I, over the next like couple months, started to make that mental transition of, okay, I think things have gone well here. The conversation about opportunity of return doesn't usually come until the very end. Um,
Is that something you
so
definitely wanted?
yeah, I really liked Insight, and so I was
Well, because some
interested.
people see like business school as a way to explore other avenues. Other people are like, they definitely want that post MBA private equity seat. And it's just a function of, you know, almost being forced to go get it. But also they like the break. The break's nice too.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, just kind of seeing the VP role at Insight, kind of this quarterback type
Mhm,
role where you're working on deals, managing portfolio, company projects.
mhm.
It just seemed like a cool next step if that was something that would be an option. And um, yeah, so anyways, that was sort of in the back of my mind, like, okay, I need to finish well just to see what happens in like May or June. Um, and then part of me was getting crushed by, a couple of tough deals that were popping up. And I just started to feel like run down again and like frustrated. And I remember buying a Headspace account over Christmas, and I was like, you know what? Like, I'm tired of just feeling stressed all the time. Like, I'm gonna try and like go a little bit deeper into this. So I started meditating, probably for like 10 minutes a day,
Mhm.
and I started to feel way less stress, like noticeable difference. And I was like, great, I'm like not stressed at work now. I like, why don't I see what 20 minutes can do?
Mhm.
So it's sort of like competitive person's mentality with, this new tool.
Upping the meditation, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You get a 20 minutes, you feel even better?
Yeah, at 20 minutes, genuinely, I started to feel like, oh wow, I am now more engaged in this like management presentation about metal tubes than I was before. Um, I think it sort of helped me get past a lot of my self talk in my head and just focus on what was at hand. And I felt like a lot of creativity starting to like come out of that.
Mm,
And finally, and this is as things are getting more and more stressful. And finally, I'm like, you know what? I am about to leave Insight. Um, I have all this PTO that I've never used because nobody ever uses PTO.
yeah.
And if they really mean it when they assign me all this PTO, then I'm going to take it, and I'm going to do this meditation retreat for 10 days in April. And like, if they're upset about it, like they shouldn't have given me the PTO. And that was sort of my mentality. And so, the next month it's, all of this effort to make sure that things seamlessly are on pause for the 10 days that I'm gone. And I did this retreat, and kid you not, it was like, it's called Vipassana. I don't know if you've heard of it,
No.
but
Where is it?
um, So there are centers all over the U.S.
Hmm.
I think this is just going to continue to explode in popularity. But
It's Vipassana. How do you spell it?
Vipassana, Vipassana.
Vipassana. Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it means it's translated to see things as they are.
Okay.
Um, so very, dramatic introduction. But basically, it was like meditating for 14 hours a day, 15 hours a day. So, you hear about bankers talking about, 16-hour days or whatever. This was like, you know, no reading, no writing, no talking, no eye contact, and no dinner. You're fasting in the evening. And, from start to finish, you essentially focus on your breathing, and then you're inflexible, like I'm inflexible, sitting there. One of the exercises is like focusing on the pain in your body. And a lot of like what the retreat is about is like learning how to focus, learning how to be fully present, and then learning how to accept where you are. And so I came out of this retreat and I was like, wow, this is great. I'm really enjoying where I am at Insight. And the next few weeks, I felt like so dialed into work and enjoying the kind of work that I was producing. I ended up deciding to not defer because I missed the deferral deadline from Wharton, but I unenrolled from Wharton and decided to take a third year at Insight and figured, you know what, like if I can do this third year, then I don't have to leave for business school feeling like this, potential imposter who just like got through this 2 years. I can really make something of this third year and go into business school feeling confident.
Hmm.
And the next year ended up being kind of all over the place in terms of the deals we worked on and stuff. But I'm super glad that I decided to stay. I was fortunate enough for Wharton to readmit me the next year. Um, Although the invite to interviews went into my spam folder, and so I had this existential crisis the day the interview invitations went out. Like, what have I done? Why did I turn this down? Um, but yeah, essentially, I spent a third year at Insight and really was able to kind of come into my own and
Talk to me a
really,
little bit more about the meditation. My dad's was a cardiologist for 30 years. He's now in clinical hypnosis. He helps people, with meditation and self hypnosis to help with pain and phobias and all that stuff. I think it's
yeah.
an important topic that doesn't get spoken about too much on the forum. So, tell me about like those 10 days in. Like you literally didn't talk to anybody, or was there like in the morning you could call friends and family and then everything put away? Like what was it like?
So you
Like, are you
get,
are you in a facility? Where are you?
yeah. So I did this in Texas. This was out on a ranch. Like, it was beautiful.
Mhm.
I've heard that in some of like the Northeast facilities, there like the retreat centers there, people share rooms. It's like hard to get good sleep. Um, but I had my own room in Texas. It was great.
Mhm.
And yeah, you don't talk all day. I mean, there's instruction during the meditation session, so you're like being told, hey, focus on the air coming in and out of your nostrils, and like now focus on your body, that sort of thing. But you only get 2 minutes a day to like have a conversation with a teacher if you want to like ask questions, basically. It's, I felt like such an idiot on like, the second day when I'm like, what have I done? Why did I burn all my PTO on this? Um, this sucks. And it wasn't even I'm bored. It was like my body is in so much pain from sitting this way, for 14 hours a day.
So when did you feel like you were better? Like day 3, 4, or 5?
So I like to say that the first like 3 to 4 days of this experience was like one of the worst 3 to 4 days of my life. And then the like fifth through 10th day were like one of the most rewarding
Mm.
phases of my life. You shift from the first 4 days, like, kid you not, you're just focused on the air coming in and out of your nose. Like, that is it. And the more that you graduate, the
Is
more
your
that you,
is your mind still spinning a little bit? It's hard to calm it. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And by like the third or fourth day, you start to get the hang of it, and then you're like super dialed in by the fourth day. Like you're able to focus on this like little area right here. Just any little sensations coming your way. I've like lost the superpower since the retreat. People do like continue to meditate for an hour, 2 hours a day after these things. I
Mhm.
try to keep up my practice, but definitely not that good. But you're like dialed in by the fourth day,
Yep.
and then all of a sudden, once you have this heightened focus, they have you shift your attention. So now you got this giant magnifying glass, and they tell you to point that. You basically scan your body, and the goal is simply to remain at peace with whatever sensations you're feeling. And you're sitting in like cross-legged position for like hours. Like that hurts. Like your hips are killing you.
I might actually die.
Yeah. No,
I'm
seriously,
the
that's
I
I'm a
had so much back pain and hip pain, and I would be, like, in excruciating pain.
Yeah, so the whole idea of days 4 through 10, and I don't if I had known this beforehand, I don't know that I would have signed up for it, but the goal is to observe your pain
Mhm.
and to
Acknowledge
learn.
it and be okay with it.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of rewire your brain through that experience. So I don't know if that
Sounds
like
like you made a pretty dramatic difference. I mean, you made some pretty big decisions right after that.
Yeah, I think I like probably had way more clarity in the moment than I did now. Like kind of like shift back into normal human life, but I still try and meditate,
It's great.
if I can every day. But yeah, it really made a difference. I think it really made me think about not necessarily, okay, what's the next thing? Like, what's the next thing that can be done? But what do I really need out of this moment? What's worth focusing on? And for me, it was like, well, I've got this great job, and I think that if I spend the next year here, I'll really grow a lot. And super glad that I did. I mean, it ended up becoming this meaningful senior associate role. I'm super obviously coming from a non-target school, super passionate about recruiting, and got to be um, involved in helping run the recruiting for our associates for the next class, and got involved in like the training for them. And so, yeah, it just ended up being a really rewarding year, and got the VP offer,
Congrats.
and am planning to go back after business school.
Super
So
exciting. Super
yeah.
exciting. Congrats. Yeah, so not surprising though, based on your past. So tell me a little bit about, before we wrap it up, looking back, besides meditation, what else would you recommend to the young folk kind of coming up, kids in undergrad, non-targets, target schools? Just looking back at your experiences, what would you say?
Yeah, such
I
a
know there's a lot, but like, if you could
expansive
distill it.
question. Yeah, I think maybe starting from just kind of the typical, career development side of things. Like I do really think that the law of compounding has an effect with career experience too. Like the earlier that you can be starting with this stuff, and the sooner that you can be building experience, the more that's just going to continue to generate returns over time. So I think starting early is a huge part of this.
Not
Um,
the advice of it'll take care of itself. Like a lot of people. No, yeah, okay. I agree
yeah,
with that. I agree with that,
yeah.
especially nowadays.
I think appreciating the value of brands, and really understanding like how human people's assessments of you can be, and how imperfect they can be. I can't tell you the number of people at McKinsey who just assumed that I was going to be a really competent, diligent modeler because of the investment banking experience that I had kind of as a branding for me. And then, in private equity, because of the McKinsey brand, people assumed, oh, this guy will be able to add value at portfolio companies without literally knowing anything else about me, right? So I think just appreciating the value that brands can have and continue to generate is, you know, really important, especially early on. I will say one of the pieces of advice in that first talk as a sophomore that I got that's kind of stuck with me. Um, the mentor had us. We're all sitting there, and he says, "You guys are all 19, 20 years old. I want you to think back to when you were 12, and think about the way that you viewed the world, your mindset, mentality. You got it? Good. Okay. The next 8 years until you become 27, 28, you're going to have nearly as much change as you did from age 12 to age 20. So, do you really want to assume that this version of yourself knows what you want to do for the rest of your life and lock in career decisions? That would be crazy.
Yeah, I
Um,
love that.
and so, like,
Well, because at
I'm,
19, 20, you assume you know everything.
yeah, exactly. And I'm on the other side of that now, about to turn 30. And it's true. Like, I really do feel like I've changed so much since then.
Mhm.
And
It
and
slows
glad that,
down, don't worry, it slows down.
yeah. But yeah, so I think really, taking your career development is something that can change over time, and not assuming that as a 20-year-old what you want to do, but rather thinking about the kinds of skills you can build, the kind of options you can create for yourself, so that over your 20s you can figure out who you are, and your 30s can really be guided towards what you want to be doing. I mean, um, but I don't know, maybe that time frame changes, but that's kind of the general sentiment in terms of career development. I think, from more of like a personal standpoint, I think it's really easy to feel imposter syndrome, or just feel like, um, you'll be found out that you shouldn't be in these types of roles. And I think, um, you go through recruiting processes to get into these experience. If you are constantly looking for a reason that you're not going to belong, then you'll find it. Like, that can't be your mentality. You really need to be, drawing deeply from, the strengths that you have. Like in my case, I knew that I had done this investment banking internship, and I knew that I could push through to that level and make it through, even though I still had these doubts. And so I think, really working on your own self-confidence, and not just assuming that you need to, macho American, power through mentality, but really, take yourself seriously, and your health seriously too. I mean, I think a lot of people that go into these roles don't like have the same volatility that I did, but still, like, the amount that you sleep does make a difference. The amount that you exercise makes a huge impact. There are tools like meditation that can really help. I think burnout is going to be a really, it has become a huge part of this generation. And I think that's probably not going to change. So being strategic about keeping good habits is not just like a necessity for yourself. You can think of it as an edge if that's the mentality you want to take. So,
Fair.
uh, yeah, I'll like stop my monologue, but I do think that, there's a lot of like personal stuff that can get neglected in these roles, that, not only can make life tougher, but really does keep you back sometimes from like doing your best work at work, you know?
For sure. Couldn't agree more. I think, Paul, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. This turned into a two-part series because I loved what you were saying so much. So thanks again for spending so much time with me and with the
Yeah, this has been
listeners.
fun.
And hopefully, maybe in a few years, once your partner will have you back. And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.